The next sutta is 9.4.35. The Buddha said, monks, suppose a cow, mountain-bred, foolish, witless, with no pasture sense, no good at roaming the rugged mountains, were to think, what if I were to go where I've never been before? What if I were to eat of the grasses I have never eaten of before? What if I were to drink of the waters I have never drunk of? And suppose she lifted her hind leg before she had planted her foreleg firmly and well. She would neither go to that place where she had not been to before, nor eat of the grasses she had not eaten of before, nor drink of the waters she had not drunk of before, nor would she get back to that place safely where her feet had formerly been planted, when she thought to roam. And why? It is because, monks, that cow, mountain-bred, foolish, witless, with no pasture sense, was no good at roaming the rugged mountains. In just the same way, monks, some foolish, witless monk with no pasture sense, unskilled in entering and abiding in the first jhana, does not practice, make become, develop, nor fix the sign thereof, so that it is well fixed. Yet he thinks, what if, after suppressing applied and sustained thought, I were to enter and abide in the second jhana? But he is not able to suppress such thoughts. So he thinks, what if, aloof from sense desires, I were to enter and abide in the first jhana? But he is not able to do that. Monks, this monk is said to have fallen at both, failed at both, and it is just like that foolish, witless, mountain-bred cow, with no pasture sense, no good at roaming the rugged mountains. I'll just stop here for a while to comment. So the Buddha here is saying that a cow may be mountain-bred, bred in the mountains, but it may be foolish, with no pasture sense. Then she is thinking of roaming the rugged mountains, but she has no skill. Before she can plant her foreleg firmly in the ground, she starts to lift her hind leg. And when you go up these steep mountains or go down the steep mountains, it is very dangerous. If the feet are not firmly planted and she starts to move her feet, then she would fall down the steep slope and be killed. So in the same way, the Buddha is saying that if some monk enters in the first jhana, but before he has developed the skill in entering and abiding in the first jhana, before he has developed enough skill in the first jhana, he thinks of entering the second jhana. Then, just like the mountain cow, he's not stable, so he cannot enter into the second jhana. And later, when he thinks of going back into the first jhana, he's also unable to do that because he has not developed the skill necessary for entering and abiding in the first jhana. Then the Buddha continues, but suppose, monks, a wise, intelligent, mountain-bred cow with pasture sense and good at roaming rugged mountains were to think, what if I were to go where I have never been before, and eat and drink where I have never done before? She would lift her hind leg after she had well and firmly planted her foreleg, and would go to that place where she had never been before, eat of the grasses she had never eaten of before, drink of the waters she had not drunk of before, and would return safely from where she came. And why? It is because that mountain-bred cow was wise and intelligent, endowed with pasture sense, and good at roaming the rugged mountains. In just the same way, monks, a wise, intelligent monk, possessing pasture sense, skilled in entering and abiding in the first jhana, practices, makes become, develops and fixes the sign thereof, so that it is well fixed, and thinks, what if, after suppressing applied and sustained thought, I were to enter and abide in the second jhana? And without confounding the second jhana, suppressing applied and sustained thought, he enters and abides in the second jhana. and he practices, makes, become, develops and fixes the sign thereof, so that it is well fixed. Then he thinks, what if I were to enter and abide in the third jhana, the fourth jhana, the sphere of infinite space, of infinite consciousness, of nothingness, of neither perception nor non-perception, and without confounding the ending of perception and feeling, passing wholly beyond the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, he enters and abides in the ending of perception and feeling. Let's stop here for a moment. So the Buddha is saying, if a cow bred in the mountains has good pasture sense, and he wants to roam the rugged mountains, then planting the feet very firmly before she moves another foot, then she would be able to go where she wants to go. Because she has the skill, the technique of climbing the mountains. In the same way, if a monk wants to go from one jhana to a higher jhana, he must practice that jhana that he has attained and be able to enter the jhana very well with great skill before he goes to the next higher jhana. Then just like that mountain cow, he is able to progress to a higher state. So that's the way for a monk to progress from one jhana to another jhana. And sometimes people don't understand. They say that a monk should not abide in jhana for long. That is not true. In the suttas we can see that the Buddha encourages monks to abide in jhana and to enjoy the bliss of jhana, because he has stated in the Digha Nikaya that there are 4 advantages to be gained from mastering the jhanas, abiding in the jhanas, and that is the attainment of the Aryan states, the first, second, third and fourth fruition state. So here you can see that it is necessary for a monk to abide long in the jhana states and master those states before moving on. It is, if a monk has not developed the skill to stay long in that jhana state, he won't be able to. He will just stay in that jhana state for a while and he will automatically come out of the state, because it is not a normal state. So the mind is not used to it. When the monk enters the first jhana, initially, for the first few times, he's not able to stay long. He has to continue abiding in that jhana. Then slowly, he will be able to stay longer and longer and longer and longer in the jhana state. And he, according to this sutta, he should continue to progress, to continue to stay in that jhana and master entering and abiding in that jhana for a long time before he thinks of moving to the next jhana. Now the Buddha, now the Buddha continues. Verily, monks, when a monk both attains to and emerges from just that attainment, his mind becomes subtle, blind, and with his mind subtle, blind, boundless concentration is well made become. And with boundless concentration well made become, he bends the mind to the realization by psychic knowledge of whatever condition is realizable by psychic knowledge, and acquires the ability of an eyewitness in every case, whatever the range may be. Should he wish, I would experience psychic power in manifold modes. Being one, I would become many. Being many, I would become one. I would fare in body even as far as Brahma's world. He acquires the ability of an eyewitness in every case, whatever the range may be. Should he wish, I would with the Deva ear hear sounds far and near. He acquires the ability. Or, encompassing mind with mind, I would know other beings' minds, other persons' minds. I would know the passionate mind as such, the emancipated mind as such, etc. He acquires the ability. Or I would recall many a dwelling place of bygone days, even 1 birth, 2 births, 3, 4, 100,000, etc. I would recall the marks and points of each. He acquires the ability. Or, I would with Deva eye, very pure and surpassing mans, no beings faring on according to their deeds, he acquires the ability. Or should he wish, having destroyed the asavas, I would enter and abide in liberation by mind. He acquires the ability of an eyewitness in every case, whatever the range may be. It's the end of the sutta. So this last part, the Buddha is saying, when the monk both attains to and emerges from that attainment, that means the attainment of, I think the last one, the ending of perception and feeling, his mind becomes subtle, pliant, and boundless concentration is developed. And with boundless concentration, then he can bend his mind to the various psychic powers that he would want. The first one, he can multiply the body as many as he can, as he is able to, depending on how great his psychic power is. And then he can walk through walls, he can dive into the ground like diving into water and come out again. He can float in the air, he can go up to fly up to the heaven, even with his physical body, etc. So this is the first psychic power. The second one is the Deva ear. Having the heavenly ear, he can hear sounds far away or near. And then the third one, he can read other beings' minds with his mind. With his mind encompassing the mind of some other person, he can read other people's thoughts. And then after that, he can recall the previous lives, 1 birth, 2 births, 3, 100, 1,000 births, etc. He can remember his past lives. And then the fifth one, he can possess the heavenly eye, where he can see a Deva eye, just like Devas. He can see beings in other worlds. And then the last one, he can, if he want, destroy the asavas and become an arahant. So this is the power of boundless concentration. That is why the Buddha said in one of the suttas that if a person makes an offering to a monk who can abide in boundless concentration, then the merit is also boundless. And then you can understand why, because the boundless concentration is the basis, is the cause of wisdom to arise, is the cause of psychic powers to arise, and also the cause for a person to attain arahanthood. The Buddha is saying here, when the monk comes out of the last jhana, his mind becomes subtle, pliant, and the concentration is boundless. And this fact that when a person emerges from a jhana state, the mind still is subtle and pliant, which means that the hindrances are abandoned even when he comes out of jhana. Definitely for some time. Then this is an important point, because there are some people say that jhana is of not much use, because when you are in the state of jhana, the hindrances are abandoned. But when you come out of jhana, the hindrances all resurface. This is not true. You can see from this sutta also. The next sutta is 9.4.36. The Buddha is saying, verily monks, I say, asava destruction depends on the first jhana. Verily I say, asava destruction depends on the second jhana, on the third, on the fourth jhana, on the sphere of infinite space, sphere of infinite consciousness, on the sphere of nothingness. Verily I say, asava destruction depends on the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. Monks, it is said, I say so. And wherefore is this said? Consider the monk who, aloof from sense desires, aloof from unwholesome states, enters and abides in the first jhana. Whatever occurs there of form, feeling, perception, volition or consciousness, he sees wholly as impermanent, as suffering, as a disease, a tumor, a dart, a calamity and affliction, as something alien, disintegrating, empty, not self. He turns his mind away from such conditions, and having done so, brings the mind towards the deathless element with the thought, this is the peace, this is the summit, just this, the tranquilization of all conditioners, the renouncing of all rebirth bases, the destroying of craving, passionlessness, ending the cool, and steadfast therein he wins to asava destruction, if not just by reason of that Dhamma delight, that Dhamma sweetness. He snaps the 5 lower fetters and is born spontaneously, and being not subject to return from that world, becomes completely cool there. Monks, suppose an archer or his pupil were to practice on a straw man or heap of clay. Presently he would become a long shot, a rapid shot, a piercer of great thicknesses. Even so, monks, the monk who, aloof from sense desires, enters and abides in the first jhana, and sees all form, feeling, perception, volition, consciousness as impermanent, as suffering, etc., as not self, turns his mind away from that and brings it towards the deathless element with the thought, this is the peace, this is the summit, just this, the tranquilization of all conditioners, the renouncing of all rebirth bases, the destroying of craving, passionlessness, ending the cool. He wins to asava destruction, or snapping the 5 lower fetters, is born spontaneously and becomes completely cool. Verily, monks, it is said, I say asava destruction depends on the first jhana, and it is for this reason that it is said. Monks, it is said, I say asava destruction depends on the second, the third, the fourth jhana, on the sphere of infinite space, of infinite consciousness, sphere of nothingness, and wherefore, consider the monk who enters and abides in the second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, sphere of infinite space, sphere of infinite consciousness, sphere of nothingness. Whatever occurs there of form, feeling, perception, volition and consciousness, he sees wholly as impermanent, as suffering, etc. He turns his mind away from such conditions and brings the mind towards the deathless element, and he wins to asava destruction, or snaps the 5 lower fetters. And it is for this reason that I said, asava destruction depends on the jhanas. Thus, monks, as far as perception prevails, there is knowledge penetration. Moreover, monks, these spheres, both the attainment of the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, and the ending of perception and feeling, are ones which I say on by jhana attainers, skilled in the attainment, skilled in emerging therefrom, after they have attained and emerged therefrom. That's the end of the sutta. So this is another very important sutta where the Buddha is saying that the attainment of arahanthood, which means the destruction of the asavas are the uncontrolled mental outflows, depends on the first jhana, depends on the second jhana, the third, the fourth jhana, and the arupa jhanas, infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception, and even the ending of perception and feeling. So here it is very clear from the Buddha's teachings here that attainment of arahanthood must depend on the jhanas. But nowadays there are some teachings which say that jhana is not necessary, and this contradicts the sutta here as well as some other sutta we heard earlier where the Buddha said, Samadhi mago, asamadhi kummago. Concentration is the way, no concentration the wrong way. And here the Buddha explains why. The Buddha says, if a monk enters the jhanas, then he's able to see the 5 aggregates, form, feeling, perception, volition or consciousness, as impermanent, as suffering, as a disease, as a tumor, a dart, a calamity, an affliction, as something alien, disintegrating, empty, not self. And so he turns his mind away from such conditions, and having done so, brings the mind towards the deathless element, saying that this is the peace, this is the summit, namely the tranquilization of all conditioners. The Pali is Sabba Sankara Samato. That's why this word samatha is tranquilization. It is not insight, tranquilization of all conditions, the renouncing of all bases, the destroying of craving, passionlessness, ending the cool. And having brought the mind to the state of complete tranquilization, then he attains to asava destruction, or if he does not attain arahanthood, then he destroys the 5 lower fetters and becomes an anagami, a third fruition person who is born spontaneously and does not return from that world to this world. The next sutta, 9.4.37. Once the Venerable Ananda, while he dwelt at Kosambi in Gosita Park, addressed the monks, saying, Reverend Sir, they rejoined, and he said, It is wonderful, amazing, Reverend Sirs, how this way of escape from the noose awoke within the Exalted One, knower, seer, arahant, wholly awakened, to purge man, pass by grief and lamentation, bring ill and unhappiness to an end, pursue the way and realize the cool. There will be just the eye, but no sensing of objects and the sphere thereof. There will be the ear, but no sensing of sounds and the sphere thereof. There will be the nose, but no sensing of smells and the sphere thereof. There will be the tongue, but no sensing of taste and the sphere thereof. There will be the body, but no sensing of touch and the sphere thereof. Now when he had spoken thus, the Venerable Udayan said to him, Is then he who senses not a sphere percipient, Reverend Ananda, or impercipient? And Venerable Ananda said, He is certainly percipient, Reverend Sir. And Udayan asked again, But how can he be percipient and yet not sense that sphere? And Venerable Ananda explained, Consider, sir, a monk who, passing wholly beyond form perception, bringing to an end perception reaction, inattentive to the diverse perceptions, enters and abides in the sphere of infinite space, thinking space is infinite. He is thus percipient, but senses not that sphere. Again, consider the monk who, passing wholly beyond the sphere of space, infinite space, enters and abides in the sphere of infinite consciousness, thinking consciousness is infinite. He is thus percipient, but senses not that sphere. Then consider the monk who, passing wholly beyond the sphere of infinite consciousness, enters and abides in the sphere of nothingness, thinking there is nothing. He is thus percipient, but senses not that sphere. Now at one time, Reverend Sirs, I dwelt in the deer park at Anjana Grove near Saketa, and there a nun of Jatila Gaha visited me, saluted and stood at one side. Thus standing, she said to me, Lord Ananda, this concentration which is neither bent away nor bent aside, in which the restraint is not controlled by conscious effort, but by its freedom is stable, but by its freedom is steadfast, by its steadfastness it is content, by its content it is not disturbed. This concentration, Lord Ananda, what is its fruit said to be by the Exalted One? And when she had thus spoken, I replied, This concentration, sister, which is neither bent away nor bent aside, in which the restraint is not controlled by conscious effort, but by its freedom is steadfast, by its steadfastness it is content, by its content it is not disturbed. This concentration, sister, is said by the Exalted One to have knowledge as its fruit. He is thus percipient, Reverend Sirs, but he senses not that sphere. That's the end of the sutta. This sutta verifies that when a monk enters the arupa jhanas, the mind opens up and the 5 sense doors totally close. When a monk enters the arupa jhana states, he cannot sense forms, sounds, smells, taste and touch. This is a very high state, arupa jhana state. And it is said in some other sutta, when a monk abides in this arupa jhana state, Mara cannot see that person in that arupa jhana state. Totally Mara, Satan, cannot see him at all. In the rupa jhana state, he is beyond the reach of Mara, beyond the reach of Satan. But in the arupa jhana state, it's not only beyond the reach. Mara cannot see him at all, because his mind opens up. And so he is conscious, he is percipient that the mind is like boundless space or like boundless consciousness. Yet he is not aware of the world around him, the normal world of the five senses. Now this, lastly, the Venerable Ananda is mentioned that a nun of the I think it's a Jatila sect, the nun came to ask him about this concentration, which is neither bent away nor bent aside, in which the restraint is not controlled by conscious effort. This is something very interesting. It's mentioned earlier, we already saw it earlier in some other sutta, that in the state of jhana, the restraint is not controlled by conscious effort. Restraint of what? Restraint of the hindrances. You don't need to make an effort to restrain the hindrances, and yet they are automatically restrained. And then it is by its freedom, it is steadfast. By its steadfastness, it is content. And because of its content, it is not disturbed. And this kind of concentration has knowledge as its fruit. That means liberation, destruction of the asavas. Now, there is another sutta I like to mention in the Samyutta Nikaya, 22.53, where the sutta, part of the sutta reads as follows: if attachment for the element of body, feeling, perception, volition, consciousness, the five aggregates, monks, is abandoned by a monk, by that abandonment of attachment, its object is cut off, and there is no support for consciousness. That unsupported consciousness, apatitang vijnana, has no increase and is without conditioners, released. By its release of freedom, it is steadfast. By its content, it is not disturbed. Not being disturbed, it just by itself attains nibbana. This is quite interesting. This saying that when attachment for the five aggregates, these five things that we associate with the self, is abandoned, is let go by a monk, then the object for consciousness, or the support for consciousness is cut off. And here the Buddha mentions about a type of consciousness which is not the normal consciousness, unsupported consciousness, apatitang vijnana. This is very interesting sutta, because it talks about this type of consciousness which is seldom seen in the suttas. Unsupported consciousness has no increase, is without conditioners, and it is released. By its release it is steadfast. By its steadfastness it is content. By its content it is not disturbed. Not being disturbed, it just by itself it attains nibbana. So this is one of the suttas where there are some monks who are of the opinion that even when the six normal consciousness dies away, stops, there is still another type of consciousness Similar to this apatitang vijnana, unsupported consciousness, which has no object, does not need an object. Normal six consciousness must have an object for it to arise. The seeing consciousness, hearing, smelling, tasting, touch and thinking consciousness, they need an object for it to arise. But this unsupported consciousness does not need an object. So this is one of the interesting suttas. In fact, there is another sutta, one of the very early suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya, where the Buddha mentioned something like when he is supported, then he sings. And when he strives, he also sings or something. And then without support and unstriving, he crosses to the other side. So here also it hints about perhaps the unsupported consciousness.